So it is truly a pleasure to introduce Jason Smith of Jason Smith Consulting and of C2P and Clarity to Prosperity. Jason and I have known each other about a year and a half now, through business, through financial planning business, through the seminar business. And this man is an absolute machine. He's a visionary. He's changed many, many lives in our industry, many lives in mine and Mike's own financial planning practice. So he's got the one business with the FMO, IMO space, but his true passion is helping financial advisors like myself and the 7 advisors we have at InvestWise Financial. That's the name of our financial planning firm in Michigan. Help their community even more, pick up more clients, make more sales, grow their book of business. And he does it through seminars first, and then something called bucket planning, bucket planning. And the first 3 advisors that went down for his training from InvestWise Financial, we had one guy that was pretty new and 2 seasoned professionals. One of them had been in the business longer than I had been. The 2 seasoned ones, they each make well over $250,000 a year. And then Brandon, who was up here, was the 3rd guy who went out there. And his revenues this year into the firm so far are already $300,000. And like he said, he's only been doing it for a year and a half. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing what that kid's been able to do. And I'm telling you all this because when all 3 of the 7 came back from the first bucket training, the 2 senior financial advisors at InvestWise Financial said I said, how'd it go? Because, you don't know, right? Jason's a nice guy, but what is it? They both said it was the best thing that they've ever done in their financial planning career. That they know that it's going to have a bigger impact than any of the other conventions they went, any of the other kind of stuff that they've done. And there's other consultants and coaches, and we use them all. And you're always going to pick up something different from one versus the other. After that, the other 4, and they were all invited, all 7 of them. We said we'd pay for it. All 7 of them were invited to go to it, and only 3 of them went. The other 4 just came back, a couple weeks ago? Because the first 3 that went, they came back and they said how amazing it was. And they said, they didn't have to talk the other 4 into going. They said, whatever they got, I want. And they took time out of their schedule to go through the same training that the first 3 folks did. Jason, like myself, is still a practicing financial advisor, and he brought in an amazing amount of assets under management, himself and the folks he works with, at a boutique independent financial planning firm that he uses seminars first, followed by referrals and this bucket plan training. And he brought in last year $50 million, which is that correct, Jason? Yeah. Which is, by any standards, just unbelievable, right? So it's a very powerful combination. We can get the cheeks in the seats. Jason can help you close them all. So with that, if you could help me welcome Jason Smith. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. I'm all mic'd up.
We are good.
Yeah, there you go. Wow, what an introduction. Thank you so much, Dean. And I want to tell you too, the market that we work in is the mass affluent. So it's the kind of middle class millionaires, the savers. That's the market we're working in. So it wasn't like we brought in a $20 million account. The biggest account we brought in last year was $3 million. So those were a lot of singles and doubles. It wasn't some huge amount. But I wanted to, I'm going to start out, and you have some handouts, and we're going to use those here in a few moments. I'm going to teach you how I use these in white glove workshops, and how I use these when I sit down with a new prospective client after a workshop to then convert them into wanting to go through the process. Did I say that right? If I say process up here, when on the next break, I give everybody permission to give me a body shot, right? Because we're on Canadian soil, I gotta say process. I've been practicing that. What's that?
Presentation.
Presentation. Okay, I'm not going to get that one right. I'm going to say I'm going to make all kinds of mistakes up here. I'll promise you that. So, I'm going to start out by telling you a little bit of a story of how this all evolved. Imagine you're 29 years old. You're making over $600,000 a year in the financial services industry. You have a part-time assistant. You're working out of a storefront. You don't really have a business, but you're doing really well financially. How would you feel at that point? 29 years old, beautiful wife, young daughter, kind of on top of the world, right? Well, all of a sudden I come home from the gym and my heart's jumping out of my chest. Something's not right. Long story short, I'm diagnosed with a life-threatening condition that would require open heart surgery. And all of a sudden I realize I have no life insurance. And if I die on an operating table, my income dies with me. So at that point, I set out and I joined $1 Million Roundtable, Top of the Table. I joined Strategic Coach, Dan Sullivan, and a multitude of different programs to figure out how can I build a process that I can teach other advisors to do in my practice, the J.L. Smith Group, to duplicate what I was doing. So God forbid if I died on that operating table, my business wouldn't die with me. So I set out on that path. Now fast forward to April of 2017, 2 years ago. After many years of monitoring, I had to have that open heart surgery. After that surgery, I had to take 5 months off. I died on the operating table. When I came home, I flatlined again, and it's kind of a miracle I'm here today. Now, I'm great. I'm through that. I'm through that phase of my life. The reason I tell you this is when I say 5 months off, no client meetings, no emails, no phone calls, no texts, nothing. I turned my cell phone over to my business partner. And I come back after 5 months. And the J.L. Smith Group, my personal practice, had the second most profitable quarter it had ever had in the company without me. Now, I had mixed feelings about that. No, but the reason I tell you that is this is what I'm going to share with you today, is the tools in this process that ultimately I was able to teach other advisors in my practice, and now thousands of advisors around the country and internationally in other countries, that helps them elevate their success to another level. Because as you're doing these white glove workshops, the great part is, think about it, there's 3 things, right, as you're trying to ultimately bring in new assets. Number 1, you got to fill the room. Easy, write a check to white glove. That's what I do, fill the room. Then number 2, you got to get the people in the room to come in to see you. And you have to inspire and motivate them, and you have to hit pain points of these pre-retirees. And those are the tools I'm going to show you how to use in the white glove workshops and when you sit down. And then number 3, you have to inspire them to want to go through the process with you, right? And because at the end of the day, the process sells the products and portfolios. And that's the change, right? A lot of you maybe are really good with people and you sell your products and portfolios, but see, there's a change happening in the entire industry all over the world. and it's more of a planning focus versus a sales focus. And so when you're running a process, what happens is it sells the products and portfolios for you, but you still have to sell the process. And so that's what these tools are gonna help you do. Now, I wrote a book about it, and it's at the booth, and everybody in the room, we brought plenty of copies, so everybody will get a copy of this book. And the daughter that I talked about in the story is actually in the back of the room, and she's off for a quarter of college. Raise your hand, Jordan. And she's working the booth. So she'll help you get your books and fill out what needs to get filled out. So what really inspired me to write this book was, I'll never forget the day. So think about sitting down, and you've probably had this experience for those of you that have been in the business a little while, of after a client passes away and you're sitting with a surviving spouse. So I'm sitting down with Irene. And this book is actually, it's a parable. It's like a fable. It's a true story of walking real people through this process. And so what happened was, as Irene comes in, and she sits with me, and it's 3 days after I just went through the services of Jerry passing away. And so it's very sudden that he passed away, and unexpected. And I'm sitting down with her, and she's, for obvious reasons, pretty shaken, pretty upset. But she insisted she wanted to sit down. She needed that peace of mind that everything was going to be okay. And I'll never forget, as I stood up on the board and I kind of drew out her 3 buckets, and I showed her how we had the money positioned and how we had all the angles covered, right? We had life insurance in place. She had income set up that she would never outlive for the rest of her life. Everything was in order. And I kind of mapped it all out on the board. And then Irene looked down at the table, and I'll never forget, and it felt like an eternity, and it was probably more like 30 seconds. And she looks up to me, and she's got tears streaming down her eyes. And she says, "Jason, I'm going to be okay, aren't I? I'm going to be okay." And at that moment, I said, wow, look what we do in this room. Look at the difference that we're making in people's lives. And I literally the next morning started writing this book. And because it inspired me so much to want to share with other people the importance of getting this type of planning in place. And so the great benefit of it is, and you guys will realize this after you read the book, you pass this out to prospective clients and your current clients, and they're going to want to go through, they're going to want a bucket plan themselves. It's very, very easy reading. It's written purposely for people that aren't super financial savvy to be able to understand it. So that's out there at the booth. You'll be able to get a copy of that. And I'm going to kind of reference some of the stuff with Jerry and Irene throughout. Now, what I want to do is have everybody in the room, and I might need some help from people in the back of the room, some of the white glove folks or the presenters, because I want to make sure everybody pairs off in twos just for a quick moment. I want to introduce yourself to your neighbor, because we're gonna do a little bit of practice with these tools here in a little bit, so I want to make sure everybody has a partner. So go ahead and pair off with somebody next to you in twos, and just give them your name, a little brief background about yourself, and do you currently do any type of bucket planning? Is this any part of your current practice? So let's go ahead and just pair off in twos and get to know each other just for a moment, 1 minute each. All right, let's bring it back in. All right. So how many of you have ever had the experience with a new prospective client that you knew was a great fit, and ultimately you delivered your recommendations, and it was clear, right? Your recommendations were going to meet their goals. It was exactly what they needed, and they said they wanted to think it over. right? How many times has that happened, right? We've all had it happen. I know I have. And so sometimes what happens is we become so sophisticated in educating ourselves that we make it not simple. We overcomplicate it. And then what we have to remember is no decision is a decision. And so we have to keep it simple. We have to remember that the things we know are very sophisticated, and to the average person, it can actually confuse them. So I'm going to show you a couple tools and how we can go about keeping it very simple. Now, this is the process that we run, and these are the Dean talked about, we brought in over 50 million last year. One advisor brought in 25 million, the other advisor brought in 15 million in my practice. So there's 40, I brought in 10 million. I brought in 10 million in 13 days last year. I worked in my practice 13 days, and in 13 days I brought in $10 million in new assets. Now, I'm not saying that like in a oh, this is a bragging type of what the heck did I do with the rest of my time? I was doing stuff like this, right? I love working with advisors. I love helping advisors be able to duplicate these same kind of things, but they all ran exactly the way you see it up here and how I'm going to show it to you. Now, I'm going to concentrate on these first three in this presentation because we don't have a whole lot of time. This is a 2-day live experiential learning event that we do, and we do it about every 2 months. And so that's part of what we offer as a firm is that training, a 2-day live experiential training. I'm going to condense that down to about 45 minutes today. But I want to concentrate on these three things. And the reason I want to concentrate on these three, and I'll give you an overview of 4, 5, and 6, is because these are the things that are really going to move the dial of actually getting them from the workshop into sit down with you for an appointment and then want to move forward with you to get their own bucket plan in place. So let's talk about the first one, the connection questionnaire. Now, I have a mentor that's mentored me throughout the years. I've known him for about probably 12 years now. His name's John Del Greco. And, I am a process guy. I am like everything very, checklist driven, making sure, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, running the system that I know works. John's not. But John actually has moved over to running this to a T because he had 2 sons that he was bringing into the business, and he realized that his gift for working with people and making the connection, he was having a hard time teaching that to his 2 kids. But he could teach them a process. And so he moved over to this. But what John said to me, and I'll never, it sticks with me to today, because I realized, and you don't want to do this is why I'm sharing this with you, is what you don't want to do is become like a robot running the system, right? I'm just going to keep saying system because process is hard to say. But you don't want to become like a robot because, you lose that human connection. And so what he said to me, he said, Jason, you never want to start this fact finder and doing all your series of questions, he said, until you see their eyes hugging you. Until you see their eyes hugging you, you don't move forward and pull out the fact finder and start asking the questions. And as soon as he said that, my wheels started turning, thinking of all the prospects that I had lost because I knew I got so focused on running step by step the process opposed to actually making that connection, right? And there's 2 points, there's 2 keys to making the connection. Number 1, until you see their eyes hugging you, and you'll see it, and you know what I'm talking about, don't go into it. It doesn't matter if it takes the entire first appointment, and especially after you're doing seminars or workshops. Because listen, if it takes the whole meeting if it takes the whole meeting just to make that connection to where they trust you, you bonded, you created rapport, that now they come back for the fact finder in the second meeting, home run, right? I mean, it's worth it. It's worth the investment of the time. So do it. So number one, make sure that happens first, because it's going to be easy to just start getting into your normal. Listen, what you do with a referral is way different than what you're going to do with a stranger that's coming in off of the workshop, right? And so you got to make that connection. But the second point, after their eyes are hugging you, is then you got to connect to their pain points. You got to disturb them, like the previous speaker said. You got to find those pain points and those priorities, those concerns, what's most important to them. So I use a tool, and if I'm sitting down with a couple, I'll slide one in front of both of them, because you want both of them to participate. Otherwise, one will dominate the other. And so I'll slide this over to them, and I'll say, listen, you know, are there any, is there anything that's kind of keeping you up at night? You know, or is there anything right now that's a top concern of yours, or why you're here today? You know, and so I ask that question first, and sometimes people, they'll just start rattling it off. Other people will be like, no, we're good. We're pretty positive people, right? No, we don't have anything. And so I slide this document over, and you're welcome to take a picture of it. You should have this as a tool. But I slide this document over, and I say, listen, I've been asking this question for some time now, and these are the most common responses that I get. And so what I would, you know, if you don't mind taking a moment, you know, circle a number one if this is a top concern or priority to you. Circle it at number three if it's not at all. And if it's important, but it's not quite a number one, just go ahead and circle a number two. And I'll slide it over to the couple, and I'll let them go through the exercise. Just takes a couple minutes, if that. Then what I'll do is I'll look at the variance. And so I'm sitting with Jerry and Irene. I remember when we were first sitting down. And Jerry was a little skeptical when I first met him. But I made the connection, and then we started going through this process, and I pulled out this document and I slided it over. And I pull it back in after they do the circles, and Irene circled running out of money as a number one. And she also circled the second one from the bottom that you can see, and I think it says something like, if the primary person who keeps track and organizes everything were to pass away, things would be a mess. So Irene circled those as a number one. Jerry circled them at a number three. And so then I asked Irene, I said, Irene, you know, you circled these as a number one. Jerry, I see you circled them as a number three. And we went into a discussion about that. And Irene went on to tell me about how her mother, well, actually her father, right, ended up passing away. He handled everything. Her mother was a mess, totally unorganized, didn't know how to take care of the affairs. Ultimately, the father had a nice fixed income, a pension, right, that went away, and ended up, she ran out of money. And then she went in to talk about how every year they used to give the grandkids presents at Christmas time, and those, as time went on, the presents eventually went away. And her and the grandkids didn't understand why. And all of a sudden, her mom didn't want to leave the house, didn't even want to go to Christmas anymore because she was so embarrassed. And how did all that come out? Because I kept asking over and over again, tell me more. They're called probing questions. Because don't do this exercise if you're just going to have them do some circles and then move on. You have to get to the pain point, right? Why did they circle that as a number one? Tell me more about that. Why did you circle that as a number one? Why is that important to you? And so now all of a sudden, Jerry's like, yeah, we need to do a plan, right? And so we move on. So connect to them, right? Get their eyes hugging you, and number one, and number two, connect to their pain points. So step two, the money cycle. So the money cycle is something, and the way I'll explain it to a prospective client is I'll say to them, the money cycle, and this is what you have in front of you, one of the documents, is something that we all go through throughout our lifetime. You're going through it, I'm going through it, we all go through it throughout our lifetime. And there's 3 phases to the money cycle: accumulation, preservation, and distribution. Now, accumulation is younger, and we're working, and we're preparing for retirement, and we can afford to take more risk. We can afford, because if we lose the money, we're working, we can make that money back. If the market crashes, we have plenty of time to wait for the accounts to come back. Now, the second phase of the money cycle is the preservation phase. It's when we start nearing retirement and we want to preserve a portion of the assets that we're going to draw from in the first phase of retirement, or the final phase of retirement, or the money cycle, distribution. Distribution to ourself in retirement, and distribution to our family upon our passing. Now, the biggest mistake that people make is they go directly from accumulation into distribution, and they never preserve a portion of the assets that they're going to draw from in the first phase of retirement. And then they're forced to sell when the market's down because they're having to take distributions, and then they can never make that money back. So you want to explain this because it's really setting the stage of why they want to have that middle bucket, that soon bucket. Because it's setting, see, most people, they have money in the bank, right? And then they have all the rest of their money out in their investment and retirement accounts. They never think about that middle bucket that they're going to draw from in the first phase of retirement. And so that's why we want to explain these 3 phases. Now I'm going to do a quick recap, and then I want you to give it a try with who you partnered off with. I want you to take the laminated document of the money cycle, and I want you to give this a try with this, because this is very important. This is something you'll want to put in your workshops into setting the stage of the biggest mistake. So there's some key words you want to use when you explain this. Number 1, you want to tell them up front 3 phases that everybody goes through: accumulation, preservation, distribution. Accumulation, younger, working, preparing for retirement. You have a long time horizon. You can afford to take more risk. Second phase, preservation. You want to preserve a portion, and don't say all of it, right? We're not trying to preserve all the money. We're preserving a portion of the money. In preparation for the third and final phase, distribution ourself in retirement, our family upon our passing. And the biggest mistake, and then you turn the laminated document over, or you click the PowerPoint, is they go directly from accumulation to distribution. Nobody wants to make the biggest mistake, right? And so that kind of gets their ears perked up, is they go from accumulation to distribution. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's team up with who you just teamed up with and give it a shot. This is 2 minutes, real easy to explain. Everybody loves role plays. Just kidding. You hate it at first, but actually once you get going, it's not too bad, is it? Listen, it's all about practice, right? I mean, the reality of it is you don't want to practice in front of your clients, but too often that's what we do. So this is actually what we do in our 2-day training that Dean was talking about over and over. We teach a concept, we break off in 2s, we role play it, then we do a group discussion. Teach a concept, break off in 2s, role play it, do a group discussion. Because what it does is at the end of the 2 days, your confidence in your capability to actually sit with a client, boom, you're there. And you're actually going to start using the tools. Versus you hear these speakers and you hear all these ideas and you take all these notes, and then at the end of the day you go back to your practice and you're like, have it on the top of the pile. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it. And then, the next day goes by and the next week goes by and it's Groundhog Day. You're doing the same way you used to do. So that's where training really comes in. So let's move on. Now, I will say these go back to back. You're going to want to explain the money cycle, and then you're going to want to go right into explaining the bucket plan philosophy. Now, there's a difference between the bucket plan philosophy and then the process that's built around it. So I want you to understand that. The document you have in front of you is the bucket plan philosophy, the philosophy of time segmenting your money based on the purpose and the time horizon of when you're going to access those funds, right? It's time segmenting the money based on the purpose and the time horizon of when you're going to access those funds. That's what the philosophy of bucketing is. It's been around forever. I didn't make it up. It was before I was born, I think it was being done, right? I just happened to trademark the bucket plan and build a process around it. Got lucky, right? So, but I want you to understand the philosophy and then the process built around it, because it is two different things. But there's many advisors that are using the philosophy on a regular basis, and they haven't really refined the process around it. And I'm giving you the philosophy. There's no reason you can't build these into your workshops and actually start talking about this as soon as you get back with your clients. So let's talk about how we kind of position this. So the now bucket is our safe and liquid money. This is basically money in the bank, right? Some of the key terminology when you're explaining this to a client or a prospect is this is your money that basically you're going to be able to put your head on the pillow at night and sleep soundly if you have that money there. I always say, listen, there's a magic number that we all have. Everybody has it. That if you have that money sitting in the bank, you're good, right? You feel good about having that money there in the bank. And so that's really typically like your emergency fund or comfort fund, some people call it. It's your large planned expenses that are coming up in the next few years. Or if you're about to go into retirement and you're going to be drawing off your liquid investable assets, you want to put a year's worth of income in the now bucket, right? So that's the now bucket. Basically money in the bank. After that, it's a simple two-bucket approach, soon and later. The soon bucket is the money that you may need sooner rather than later. So you want to take a more conservative approach, because if you have to go to that money for income or withdrawals, you know you're going to be able to access it and not worry about if the market crashes, right? Or if you're in bonds and interest rates go up, what happened to bond values? What happens when interest rates go up? They go down, right? And people forget that interest rate risk is just as real as market risk. And so the thing is, though, is talking to people about having a certain amount of money. This really is that preservation money from the money cycle, set up so you can confidently know you can go to it for income or withdrawals if you spend the money that's in the bank. So now if we have a now and a soon bucket established, we've bought ourselves a time horizon to be able to confidently invest the rest of the money in the later bucket. Later bucket, long-term growth, because we bought a time horizon with the now and the soon. We can afford to take on the ups and downs of the market. And legacy planning. And listen, my clients will say to me, listen, Jason, legacy planning, my kids are raised. Whatever's left is left. How many of you have heard that? Right? But see, legacy planning is not just for the kids. It's most importantly for who? The surviving spouse. Right? Think about a paradigm shift there. Right? Legacy planning is not just for the kids, it's more importantly and most importantly for the surviving spouse, because when one spouse passes away, what happens to income in a lot of cases? Most cases. Goes down. But what happens to income taxes? They go up, right? Because a single filer versus married filing jointly, it's not as favorable. Right? And not a lot of expenses change. But ultimately, income goes down, taxes go up. It's a double whammy. And that's why legacy planning is most importantly for the kid or for the surviving spouse first. So when you talk about this philosophy, those are the things. But here's the reality of it. This is an asset allocation strategy that your clients will actually understand. They don't understand pie charts and all these different asset classes and segments and sectors and all this, mumbo jumbo language that we all use as financial advisors, but they understand buckets, right? They understand these 3 buckets, but all we're doing is doing an asset allocation strategy they actually understand. So the money cycle sets up why they need a bucket plan, the 3 buckets set up. Because they're going to immediately connect that preservation money, the middle, this is the middle here, the soon bucket. They're going to be, yeah, I got money in the bank. Yeah, I got all these other assets. Aha, the light bulb comes on. I don't have a soon bucket. That's what's going to happen. And guess who they want to hire? Who are they going to want to hire? Let's say me, right? Let me hear you. Right. They're going to want to hire you. Now, there's a whiteboard video that I'm going to play for you next. And if you go to YouTube and just do the search, The Bucket Plan, you can bring this up on your tablet, on your big screen in your office, whatever, and you can play this for your prospective clients to explain the philosophy. So I'm going to play this whiteboard video for you.
Most people have heard of a bucket list, but have you ever heard of the bucket plan? The old way to plan for retirement was to keep a little bucket of money in the bank and a big bucket of money in savings and investments for the future. But as we all know, the market goes up and down. If you're pulling money out of your big bucket of money for income when the market is down, you essentially have to cash in a larger piece of your portfolio to get the amount of money you need. Ultimately, this creates one of the biggest concerns facing retirees today: running out of money. Enter the bucket plan. The bucket plan is a 3-bucket approach to structuring your assets to provide reliable income throughout retirement. This includes now, soon, and later buckets. First, the now bucket provides safe and liquid money. This includes money for your emergency fund and large planned expenses for the first few years of retirement, like a car or new roof on the house. There's little to no growth these days at the bank, but these cash savings or money market accounts also aren't exposed to market volatility. By pulling this money off the table, you can sleep better at night knowing it's there when you need it. The second bucket is the soon bucket. This is your conservative investments and income money. This money you may need sooner rather than later, and it can be used as a planned income source for the first phase of retirement. It's set up for growth to help offset inflation, but invested conservatively. This way, if there was a big correction or downturn, this money won't experience the full swing of the stock market that could impact your spending plans during the early years of retirement. Lastly, there's the later bucket. This is your long-term growth and legacy planning money. There's more growth opportunity than in buckets 1 and 2 because it's invested for the long term. You have bought a time horizon with the now and soon buckets, and may be willing to take on more volatility, knowing you have plenty of time before you plan to use this money. You can confidently invest in the later bucket without having to worry about the day-to-day market volatility. This may also be your legacy planning money, not just for your kids, but for your surviving spouse. When one spouse passes, the household income almost always goes down, and oftentimes taxes go up. This bucket of money helps you to plan for that. Are you ready to make your money go the distance? To put a plan in place for the different phases of your retirement, ask your financial advisor for the bucket plan planning process.
Good? Yep. Good. So that's a resource for you. And this is what we handed out. And I know everybody's nervous. I'm actually going to skip this role play in honor of time. Because if you get the money cycle down, play the bucket plan whiteboard video. And after you play it a number of times, you'll get that verbiage down. You'll memorize it basically and be able to say it yourself. So let's move on to the next 4 steps. But I do want to say these first 3 are the ones that, again, you're going to be able to bake these into your White Glove workshops. We do taxes and retirement workshops. And like, for example, and you guys have this too, at like 71 or 72, you're forced to start taking distributions from your RIF. Did I say it right? Yeah, nice. All right, I did some homework. So yeah, we have to do it too out of our IRAs, our people at 70 and a half. So very similar. And so, this, when I get to the taxes and retirement workshop, and I start talking about where we have to take those distributions out at 70 and a half, and you guys would be talking about the RIF, this is where I bake in this whole concept of sequence of returns risk. And we have some really cool charts that are in a binder that are at the booth that are also PowerPoint slides. Frank, you worked on some of these with us on showing sequence of returns risk. But it's really powerful because you show what can happen, because the money cycle is just another way to explain sequence of returns risk. It really is. Like, if you don't preserve a portion of somebody's assets, they're going to draw from first, and then they're forced to take distributions when the market's down. That's what causes sequence of returns risk. And so, so we bake it in right when we talk about where they're forced to take money out. Because, at that point, whether they realize it or not, if they need the money or not, they're forced to take it out. So forced income can cause sequence of returns risk. See, everybody always thinks of sequence of returns risk only applicable to the people who need income. But if you are forced to take income out and you have to pay the government their chunk, right? Because in reality, we're all in a partnership with the federal government, aren't we? Right? They own a big chunk of that RIF money. And so, and that seems to resonate when you say that to people in a partnership with the federal government. They own a big portion of that money. And so when you pull that distribution out, because you're forced to, you got to pay tax, right? So can you reinvest the whole amount of principal if the market's down? No, so it's subjecting them to sequence of returns risk. So that's where we'll bake it into our White Glove workshop. We also, we do it in all our workshops. We find a way to kind of bake in the bucket plan, because ultimately that's what they're going to want to come in and talk to us about. But now I want to talk about 4, 5, and 6. And so the next steps of the process that ultimately ends up in 6, their own customized bucket plan. So the income gap assessment. So how many of you enjoy working with your clients on doing a line item budgeting process? How many of you enjoy going through that, right? Not a whole lot of hands flying up. Now, how many of your clients really love to go through that whole budget process, right? They don't, right? So this is something the American College, who teaches the Certified Financial Planner designation and Retirement Income Certified Planner designation. It's called the consumption methodology. It's a shortcut to budgeting. It's so you don't have to do budgeting. So the idea is you take this top section is what income's going to get lost in retirement, right? If they retire, what's going away? You start there. Section number 2 is what income is going to be injected into the scenario in retirement, right? What fixed income sources can now they retire on, that are going to start kicking in retirement. So those can offset each other. And then the third portion is, are there any adjustments? Are there any expenses that are going away? Are there any expenses that are, they want to travel or whatever it might be? So I'm taking Jerry and Irene through this process. I'm just hardwired, sorry. So I'm taking them through, and at this point, I asked them, hey, do you have a budget in place? And they say, they kind of look at each other and they kind of laugh and they say no, but it's not like a funny laugh. It's kind of like a little bit of, there's something more, of a story behind things. And so then, Irene says, no, we can't have a budget because I have no clue how much, Jerry's spending down at the pub with his buddies. And, they like to buy lottery tickets. And then, Irene comes in and our Jerry comes in. He's like, yeah, and Irene's always helping out our daughter, Dawn, with money on the side. And so we don't really know what that number is. And so then they come back and I'm like, oh boy, I got to tread lightly here. And then they come back and they're like, no, Irene says, I love it that Jerry spends the time, with his buddies. And Jerry says, no, and, listen, Dawn's a single mother. We got to help her out. That's the reality. And so they said, the truth of it is, Jason, like, we can't stand the idea of doing a budget. We just don't want to go through that. It's just not the kind of people we are, and we don't want to do it. I said, don't worry about it. There's a tool that we can use. And I took them through this. And they loved it. They loved it. And so when we got to the end, it ended up that, the credits offset the debits. But they ended up being $30,000 is what they were going to have to draw off of their investments in retirement. This is what their income gap was, 30 grand a year. So then I ask a question. Of this $30,000 that we need off of our investments, how much of that income do you want guaranteed? And what are they typically going to say? All of it? Or what do you mean? And so either way, you want to follow it up with, listen, there's really only three ways that we can guarantee income. We can guarantee income through the bank, like a CD ladder. We could build out a CD ladder. We could guarantee income through the government. We could buy government bonds. I think this is all applicable to you guys. Or we can guarantee income through an insurance company. And so, like pensions do. That's what we call them in the U.S. What do you guys call it here, a pension? Like a fixed income source? A pension, awesome, perfect, awesome. All right, so there's really only three ways to guarantee income. Do you have a preference of which one? Or do you just want the one that's going to give you the highest potential rate of return? Highest potential rate of return. I have that conversation because I want to understand, too, because I use insurance company products and I also use investment products in my practice. I use them both. I think they're both very important. And so I want to understand if they're like, no way, I don't want any insurance company stuff, right? I mean, I want to know that up front before I go at the end and I shoot myself in the foot by recommending, something with an insurance company, for example. So I'll ask that question. And I did at Jerry and Irene. And at that point, they were like, one with the highest potential rate of return. And so now the next part of the process, the volatility tolerance analysis. How many of you right now are using some kind of risk assessment tool to ask before you're putting them in, the products and portfolios? A lot of you are. So I think it's very important that we do that. The thing that I have had a problem with all the risk assessments out there, like real popular in the US is Riskalyze and Finimetrica. Those are two most popular ones. Is they score it like it's all one giant bucket, right? They're all scored like one giant bucket. They're not scoring the bucket separately. So what we did is we built our volatility tolerance analysis, and we call it volatility instead of risk because risk is more like you're going to lose the money. I'm using diversified portfolios, right? And it's more volatility, more so than risk, right? So I want to understand how much tolerance they have for volatility. And I score the soon bucket, it's 5 simple questions, separately from the later bucket, which is 7 more questions. Takes on average about 11 minutes to fill it out, 8 to 11 minutes, 11 on the higher end. We know because we time it in the trainings. And so then at the end of the day, though, we have a separate score for the soon bucket, separate from the later bucket. Does it make sense to invest that money separately? Money that you're going to be drawing from in retirement heavily sooner rather than later versus money that you have a 10 or a 15-year time horizon before you're going to access those funds. Why in the world would you invest it all the same way? You wouldn't. So we score the buckets separately. And so the interesting thing is how am I on time too?
Take all the time you need.
Well, we're probably just shortening the speaker panel a little bit, so maybe the next 5.
5 minutes?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, I'll wrap in 5. So I'll skip that story. All right, let's go to the bucket plan. Design. So now we're designing and delivering the bucket plan based on everything that we learned. And there's a lot of stuff you learn in that connection questionnaire that is really built into this. But the bare bones example, and there's a design worksheet that we've created that walks you step by step how to design the customized bucket plan. But I'm going to kind of walk you through this. So first of all, the now bucket. You know, you'll have already asked this throughout the process, but let's say in this case, Jerry and Irene had $1.2 million. And so I ask them the question, what's that magic number? Listen, guys, we all kind of have this number. There's a certain amount of money that you're going to start to feel uncomfortable if you don't have that money in your checking and savings or in the bank. Let's talk about what that number is. And you have a conversation. There's a couple questions and a way you can ask it. And so it ended up being $35,000 for them. They wanted to make sure 35 grand. Anything less than that, start getting uncomfortable. Then you're going to ask about any planned expenses. Well, they wanted to trade in their car. They didn't want a car payment, and they wanted to upgrade their car, wanted an extra 15 grand with the trade-in to buy a new car. So we put that in. In their case, they weren't retiring for a couple years, so we didn't need the third checkbox of 0 to 12 months of income because the income's coming from work, right? From where they're working. So there's only 2 components in their now bucket, emergency fund, car purchase. We're going to leave that money, that's 50 grand, we're going to leave that money in the bank. Then you have the soon bucket. How much was the income gap? Anybody remember? 30 grand, right? We keep it real simple. 30 grand times 10 is what? 30. Right. 30, it's hints up on the screen. It's 300,000, right? So this is financial advisors, right? No, I'm just kidding. So it's 300,000 bucks. And I do that because isn't it a general consensus that if you buy a 10-year time horizon, usually the market's going to do pretty good over 10 years? That's what the public, that's the way they've been programmed. It's generally pretty true statement. And so we just follow that simple rule. 30 times 10, 300 grand. Then we put in an inflation hedge. RRSP eventually turns into a RIF when you roll it over, right? Getting good at this Canadian stuff. 375,000. And now, based on how there's 2 factors that it's going to determine. You know, you might do segregated funds, right? Or you might do a CD ladder or a bond ladder. If they answered they wanted the money guaranteed, you're going to look at those, potentially some of those options. If they're like not worried about having the money guaranteed, then you're going to base it on how they scored on their volatility tolerance analysis in the soon bucket. Well, those 2 combinations or data points will determine how you're going to invest the money in the soon bucket. The rest of the money's in the later bucket. It's just the rest of their money. And then they scored growth, we're going to put it into growth portfolios out in the later bucket. Super simple. I'm landing the plane. These are the 6 steps to the process. These are the tools in addition to the YouTube whiteboard video and this book will you be your best friend and you pass this out to prospects. The book will sell the process. They'll come to you to walk them through it. And if you want to learn more, we have podcasts that we produce on a monthly basis. The bucket plan one goes through every one of these tools in detail. Every one of these tools. So if you subscribe on Apple or I guess Android's the other one, and if you have a third kind, then you probably should get an Apple or an Android. But lastly, and this is at the booth, what we're doing is you can buy the binder with a guide of how to use all the tools, and all the tools are in the binder. So that's package number 1, and you get a 1-hour coaching call with one of our bucket plan certified advisors. Package number 2, you also get the online course, unlimited. Listen to it over and over again. How do I explain it to a prospective client, word for word? So the whole online course is available, option 2. Option 3, that's where you also get to do the 2-day live experiential training. Make it a great day.